Chapter 14, the Digestive System and Nutrition, Screencast 3. Now, this screencast will focus on the accessory organs and also what's left of the GI tract, so basically large intestine, rectum, and anus. The first structure that we're going to talk about is the pancreas. Now, we talked about the pancreas previously when we did the endocrine system. The pancreas is primarily both exocrine and endocrine. The endocrine component is related to the regulation of blood glucose through the hormones insulin and glucagon, but the majority of the pancreas is actually an exocrine organ, and it produces many secretions associated with digestion, and they move into the small intestine, the duodenum. So one of the things that we'll see is sodium bicarbonate, and that's actually as a buffer. Remember, the small intestine is receiving these really acidic contents from the stomach, so there has to be a way to basically neutralize the acidic contents of the stomach, and so that's one of the substances that the pancreas actually produces. Sodium bicarbonate, which is a buffer to neutralize stomach contents. As far as the digestive enzymes go, we see proteases. Examples would be trypsin, chymotrypsin, and carboxypeptidase. We see pancreatic amylase, which is responsible for starch digestion, and lipase, which is responsible for the digestion of lipids. Here, one of the things that I may ask as far as a matching question would be the overall enzyme and the function or what it breaks down. So that's something to keep in mind that I could potentially ask here. So where they're produced and so on. Now, the liver is actually the largest organ of the body. And one of the things that the liver does, it actually produces bile. And bile is necessary for the digestion of fat. And what bile actually does, it acts as an emulsifier. Now, another structure that we find within the liver is what's known as the hepatic portal system. This is a really important set of vessels, and what it does, it basically drains blood from the digestive tract to the liver. So even though we're talking about blood that's poorly oxygenated, it's high in nutrients because it's drained from the digestive tract. Now, if we look at the functions associated with the liver, it does an awful lot. We look at the storage of various things such as glycogen, remember that, synthesis of glycogen, synthesis of glucose. We can actually look at lipid being formed, and all sorts of things are actually being done by the liver. And a number of things are also processed. On the bottom of the liver is the gallbladder. Now, this is important. The gallbladder does not produce bile. It concentrates and stores bile. And this is important to remember because many people actually have their gallbladder removed. Now, they still produce bile, but one of the primary recommendations for someone that, especially recently recovering from gallbladder surgery, is to stay away from things that are fat. So that's an important thing to keep in mind there. Here we can actually see how large the liver is. We see the pancreas. We can actually see the pancreatic duct, and that actually feeds into the duodenum. So all of those digestive enzymes coming from the pancreas move into the duodenum. Remember, the duodenum is where most digestion takes place, so that kind of makes sense. We can actually see the gallbladder, and remember, this actually stores and concentrates bile, and it will move bile or transport bile to the duodenum through the common bile duct, and we can see that here. So a really good diagram that shows the relationship of the liver, stomach, pancreas, and the duodenum. Here we can see the hepatic portal system, and notice what's really important here. Basically, it's draining all the structures of the GI tract and moving them into the liver. So that's really important when we look at that particular role of those sets of blood vessels, that hepatic portal system. Now, the large intestine, the primary function here is to absorb nutrients and water. Not a lot of absorption. There are some, okay, that will be absorbed here. it's also responsible for the temporary storage and waste elimination. Now, if we look at the structure of the large intestine, it has the cecum, the appendix, and the colon is subdivided into directional terms: ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid. And then we have the rectum and anus. Now, one thing to keep in mind about the large intestine is we host a large bacterial colony of E. coli within our large intestine. This plays a very important role breaking things down through the process of fermentation and so on. Also, a lot of the immune function associated with the digestive system is associated here. Okay, so that's an important thing you kind of want to keep in mind. You may have heard of a term as the microbiome, and the microbiome basically relates to our own bacteria and things like that. Many of you may actually take probiotics. That's a really good example of enhancing the capacity of our microbiome. One of the problems has been the indiscriminate use of antibiotics, and this has had some impact on the microbiome because it will actually kill our natural bacterial population. So that's something to keep in mind, but that's important. Here we can basically see complete. Okay, so there's the cecum, the ileocecal valve, which is separating the small intestine from the large intestine. Okay, and then we have ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon. The curved part is the sigmoid colon, and then we have the rectum and anus. And the anus is going to be made up primarily of two sphincters, external sphincter and an internal sphincter. The internal sphincter is actually smooth muscle and under autonomic control, and the external sphincter is skeletal muscle. So when you're potty training a child, okay, one of the things that they're learning how to do is actually the ability to control the external sphincter and the ability to defecate voluntarily. Now, the next part we want to look at is the actual absorption of nutrients. So a little bit of a review here. So amino acids, that is the product when proteins are broken down. Those are going to be absorbed through active transport mechanisms. So remember, that's going to be involved moving something against its gradient. Monosaccharides, that's the result of carbohydrate breakdown. So examples primarily are going to be glucose. Those would be absorbed by active transport also. Lipids are going to be broken down to monoglycerides and fatty acids. Now, these are kind of interesting because they're going to be absorbed, but reassembled into triglycerides within epithelial cells. Water will be absorbed by osmosis. Remember, water follows solute if it can. And then if we look at various vitamins and minerals, they're absorbed both passive and actively, depending upon the vitamin and the mineral. Here, things to kind of take a look at. Let's get our overall frame of reference. So here we are within the lumen of the intestine. This is that epithelial cell layer, and this is going to be vessels going to the portal system. Okay. So here we see carbohydrates being broken down into monosaccharides by pancreatic enzymes. We can see proteins broken down into amino acids by intestinal enzymes, and they're going to be transported, okay, across that epithelial cell. And notice they're all smaller now, okay? And they're going to move into the hepatic portal system, or the capillaries moving towards the hepatic portal system. Here we're looking at fat. Remember, fat, being lipid soluble, diffuses through cell membranes. And so here we have a globule. And what happens, that globule is going to be emulsified by bile. So see what's kind of happened here. So it's kind of changed structure overall. Now it can actually be digested by enzymes. So it's going to be broken down into monoglycerides and free fatty acids and micelles, and these are actually going to be absorbed through the epithelial layer, okay? And here we're within that particular villus, Okay, we can see the lacteal, where chylomicrons are going to be produced. We can also see the reformation of triglycerides also happening. Okay, so the absorption of fat is definitely much more complicated than the absorption of other nutrients. Now, the next part is, how is all this really complex mechanism regulated? And so the GI tract kind of has its own special nervous system. It's called the enteric system. Those individuals that really do follow digestive function, they quite often will think of this area that's responsible for controlling digestion as the brain of the gut. All right. Now, a couple of things we want to keep in mind. So the regulation of digestion is accomplished through nerves and hormones, and it's very dependent upon the volume and what's in the food itself. Now, some examples of nervous regulation would be stretch receptors within the stomach. So as the stomach becomes full, it stretches, and then we're going to see, in response to that stretch, more peristalsis, so increased gastric motility, and also an increase in the secretion of gastric juices. Now, there's also 3 hormones. One is released by the stomach, and the remaining are produced by the duodenum of the small intestine. So gastrin, this is released by the stomach. This is going to be responsible for upregulating, gastric activity, whereas secretin and cholecystokinin, or CCK, those are produced and released by the duodenum. They actually counteract gastrin. So they slow down gastric function, because now the role is to digest intestinal content. So we want to activate those processes, but we don't want stuff to be moving into the small intestine. So gastrin function will be inhibited by the hormones of the small intestine. Now, as noted, gastrin is triggered by the stretching of the stomach and protein, and that will result in the release of gastric juice. Secretin, that's triggered by the presence of acid in chyme. That's going to tell the pancreas to secrete water and bicarbonate or buffer. Cholecystokinin, this is going to be triggered by fat and protein found in the chyme. And this is going to tell the pancreas to start secreting its digestive enzymes. It's also going to tell the gallbladder, let's start releasing bile.